He allowed his mistress to slap his ex-wife and laughed. Seconds later, her fiancé walked in, a royal prince in disguise. The sound of skin meeting skin echoed through the restaurant like a thunderclap. Every fork stopped moving. Every conversation died. 200 pairs of eyes turned toward the woman in red, who had just struck the woman in the simple blue linen across the face. Ben Hartwell, the 28-year-old tech billionaire who had graced the cover of Forbes twice before turning 30, didn't flinch. He didn't intervene. He simply swirled his whiskey, watching his mistress assault his ex-wife with the bored expression of a man watching a mildly interesting television program. "That's for existing," Kate hissed, her diamond bracelet, a gift from Ben, catching the candlelight as she lowered her hand. Lenny stood perfectly still. A red mark bloomed across her cheek like a rose opening and fast forward. She didn't cry. She didn't scream. She simply looked at Ben with eyes that held something far more terrifying than anger. She looked at him with patience. What Ben didn't know, what he couldn't possibly know, was that the quiet man standing 3 feet behind Lenny wasn't her driver. He wasn't her colleague. He wasn't even American. He was Prince Robert of Denmark, fourth in line to one of the oldest thrones in Europe, and in exactly 6 weeks, Lenny would become his wife. The slap that Ben allowed to happen didn't just end his reputation. It ended his empire. And by the time the sun rose over Manhattan the next morning, Ben Hartwell would learn that some doors, once closed, stay closed forever. This is the story of how a billionaire watched his mistress assault a future princess and discovered that karma doesn't need to be loud to be devastating. The Hartwell penthouse occupied the entire 67th floor of 157, the building they called the Billionaire's Row Crown Jewel. From the floor-to-ceiling windows, you could see Central Park spread out like a green carpet rolled out for royalty. But Lenny Chen had stopped looking at the view 18 months ago. She stood in the kitchen at 6 a.m., the only lights coming from the range hood above the stove, where she was preparing Ben's preferred breakfast. Egg white omelet, precisely 3 pieces of turkey bacon, coffee from beans flown in weekly from a single farm in Ethiopia. She knew his preferences better than she knew her own birthday at this point. The penthouse was 8,000 square feet of Italian marble and custom furniture. Lenny moved through it like a ghost, her bare feet silent on the heated floors. She heard him before she saw him, the sharp click of his Oxfords on marble, the clearing of his throat that always preceded criticism. "You're still in your robe," Ben said, not as a question. He was already dressed in a charcoal Tom Ford suit, his dark hair styled with mathematical precision. At 28, Ben Hartwell had the face of a cologne advertisement and the warmth of a winter in Siberia. "The Hendersons are coming for brunch at 11. I need you presentable." "Good morning to you too," Lenny said softly, sliding his plate across the kitchen island. Ben glanced at the omelet like it had personally offended him. "Is this the Sicilian olive oil?" "It's the same olive oil I've used for 3 years, Ben." "It tastes different." He pushed the plate away. "I'll eat at the office. Rachel orders from that place I like." Rachel, his executive assistant. The name landed in Lenny's chest like a small, sharp stone. She had learned to collect these stones, to carry them silently, to pretend they didn't exist. "About the Hendersons," Lenny started. "Wear the cream Chanel, not the one with the buttons, the other one, and keep the conversation light. Mitchell Henderson is considering a $50 million investment in the Series C round, and I don't need you boring his wife with your—" Ben waved his hand vaguely. "Charity talk." "It's not charity talk. It's the Children's Literacy Foundation. I've been building it for—" "Lenny." Ben's voice was the verbal equivalent of a door closing. "I have a meeting with the Goldman team in 40 minutes. I don't have time for this. Just smile, nod, and don't try to be interesting. It's not your strong suit." He left without touching his coffee, without touching her, without so much as a glance backward. Lenny stood alone in the kitchen that cost more than most Americans' houses, holding a spatula in one hand and 3 years of silence in the other. She didn't cry. A broken woman cries. A woman making a decision goes quiet. Kate Morrison had been Ben's public relations consultant for exactly 14 months. She was 24, a former Miss Georgia semi-finalist with honey blonde hair that tumbled past her shoulders in waves that cost $400 every 6 weeks to maintain. She had a master's degree from Columbia that she never used, and a talent for making powerful men feel even more powerful. Ben had hired her to manage his public image after a minor scandal involving a hostile workplace complaint. What she actually managed was his calendar, his ego, and his hotel room in the Tribeca building his company owned, the one Lenny didn't know about. On this particular Tuesday, Kate was lying across Ben's chest in that hotel room, her finger tracing patterns on his skin. "When are you going to leave her?" Kate asked, the question she had learned to ask casually, as if she didn't care about the answer. Ben stared at the ceiling. "It's complicated." "You've been saying that for a year." "Because it's been complicated for a year." Ben sat up, reaching for his phone. "Lenny's family situation is useful. Her father's connections in the Asian markets opened doors for Hartwell Tech that would have taken me a decade to crack otherwise." Kate's perfectly sculpted eyebrows drew together. "So you married her for business?" "I married her because she was convenient. Pretty enough, smart enough, quiet enough. The perfect startup wife." Ben laughed, a short, hollow sound. "She used to look at me like I was the sun. Do you know how addictive that is? Having someone worship you? And now? Now she looks at me like she's waiting for something." Ben's jaw tightened. "I hate it. It's like living with a witness." Kate sat up, letting the sheet fall strategically. "Then stop living with her. I'm tired of being your secret, Ben. I want to go to the galas. I want to be in the photos. I want what she has." "What she has is a title. Mrs. Benjamin Hartwell. It's a brand." "Then give me the brand." Kate's voice hardened beneath the honey. "I've earned it. I've been loyal. I've kept your secrets. I've handled the journalists and the board members and the investors' wives who look at you like you're a piece of meat." She grabbed his chin, forcing him to look at her. "I'm not asking anymore, Ben. I'm telling you. File the papers or I'll find someone who will give me what I want." Ben looked at her. In that moment, he saw something he recognized. Ambition, hunger, the willingness to burn everything down to get what you wanted. It was like looking in a mirror. "I'll have the lawyers draw something up," he said. Kate smiled. 3 weeks later, Lenny came home from a foundation board meeting to find a manila envelope on the kitchen island. There was no note, no explanation. Just the envelope, placed precisely in the center of the marble, like an art installation. She knew what it was before she opened it. Her hands didn't shake as she pulled out the documents. Petition for dissolution of marriage. The words swam for a moment before settling into sharp focus. She read through the terms with the methodical attention she had once applied to her graduate thesis. Ben was offering her nothing. The prenuptial agreement, the one she had signed at 24, too young and too in love to understand what she was giving away, entitled her to exactly $100,000 and her personal belongings. No claim to the penthouse, no claim to the company she had helped build by hosting every investor dinner, charming every skeptical board member, smiling through every humiliation. No claim to the life she had spent 3 years constructing around a man who had never seen her as anything more than furniture. The front door opened. Ben walked in, still in his suit, Kate trailing behind him in a red dress that probably cost more than Lenny's entire wardrobe. "You found them," Ben said. Not sorry, not guilty, just observational, like he was noting the weather. Lenny looked at Kate. The younger woman was examining the penthouse with open covetousness, her eyes cataloging the art, the furniture, the view, already decorating in her mind. "I see you brought your consultant," Lenny said, her voice remarkably steady. Kate laughed. "I'm a little more than a consultant, sweetheart, but you probably figured that out months ago, didn't you? Wives always know. They just pretend they don't." "Kate," Ben's voice held a warning. "What? She's a big girl. She can handle the truth." Kate walked toward the kitchen, her heels clicking on the marble Lenny had picked out. Past the couch where Lenny had spent 3 years waiting for a husband who was never coming home. "The truth is, you were a placeholder. You were good enough until something better came along. And honey," Kate stopped directly in front of Lenny, close enough that Lenny could smell her perfume. Chanel No. 5, the same perfume Lenny used to wear before Ben told her it was too common. "Something better came along." Lenny said nothing. She simply looked at Ben, waiting. "Just sign the papers, Lenny," Ben said. He sounded tired. inconvenienced, like she was a task on his to-do list that had taken too long to complete. My lawyers will handle the rest. You can keep the jewelry. Sell it if you need to. I'm being generous here. Generous, Lenny repeated. You get to leave with your dignity. Some women don't even get that. Lenny looked down at the papers. Then she looked at Ben. Then she looked at Kate, who was already opening the refrigerator and frowning at the contents. We're going to need to redo this entire kitchen, Kate said to no one in particular. It feels so basic. Lenny picked up the pen Ben had left beside the envelope. She signed her name. Not Lenny Hartwell. Not the woman she had been for 3 years. She signed Lenny Chen. Her hand didn't shake. Her eyes didn't water. She simply reclaimed the name she was born with and set the pen down. I'll have my things out by Friday, Lenny said. Ben blinked. He had expected tears. He had expected pleading. He had expected the performance of grief that he could later use to tell his friends, she took it hard, but it was for the best. Instead, Lenny walked past him, past Kate, past the life she had built on a foundation of sand. She paused at the door. You know, she said, not turning around. My grandmother used to say something. She said the universe keeps receipts. I never understood what she meant until just now. She left. Ben and Kate stood in the penthouse, surrounded by 8,000 square feet of silence. Well, Kate said, closing the refrigerator. That was easier than expected. The coffee shop was called Groundwork, a small place in Williamsburg with exposed brick and baristas who all seemed to be writing novels. It was exactly the kind of place Ben Hartwell would never set foot in, which made it exactly the kind of place Lenny needed. She had been coming here every morning for 3 months, sitting at the same corner table with her laptop, rebuilding the foundation she had been forced to abandon when Ben's lawyers made it clear that any organization bearing the Hartwell name, even tangentially, would be contested in court. So she had started over. New name, new mission, new everything. The Children's Lighthouse Foundation was small. Just Lenny, a part-time administrator, and a handful of volunteers. But it was hers. Every grant proposal, every donor meeting, every success and failure belonged to her and her alone. Excuse me, is this seat taken? Lenny looked up from her laptop. The man standing beside her table was tall, perhaps 6'2" or 6'3", with sandy brown hair that fell slightly across his forehead and blue eyes the color of a Copenhagen winter. He was dressed simply, dark jeans, a navy sweater, leather shoes that were expensive but not ostentatiously so. He held a coffee cup and a worn paperback copy of East of Eden. No, go ahead, Lenny said, gesturing to the chair across from her. Thank you. He sat down, placing his book on the table. I'm Robert, by the way. Lenny, that's an unusual name. For a woman, I mean. Is it short for something? Lennox. My father was obsessed with jazz. Lennox Lewis, the club, not the boxer. She smiled slightly, though he probably wouldn't have minded the boxer either. Robert laughed. It was a good laugh, warm and unguarded. My father named me after my great-great-grandfather. Very boring. Very expected. Family tradition. Something like that. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment. Lenny returned to her laptop, and Robert opened his book. But every few minutes, she noticed him glancing up, not in a predatory way, but with a gentle curiosity that felt almost old-fashioned. What are you working on? He finally asked. If you don't mind my asking. Lenny hesitated. She had learned during her marriage to minimize herself, to make her ambitions small and palatable. But something about this stranger, maybe it was the genuine interest in his eyes, maybe it was the fact that she had nothing left to lose, made her want to tell the truth. I run a literacy foundation. We build libraries in underserved communities and provide tutoring programs for kids who are falling behind in school. She paused. It's small, but it matters. Robert leaned forward. That's extraordinary. It's just... No. His voice was firm. Don't diminish it. There is nothing just about teaching a child to read. You're changing the trajectory of lives. That's not small. That's everything. Lenny stared at him. In 3 years of marriage, Ben had never once said anything like that. He had never looked at her work as anything other than a hobby, a way to keep her busy while he built his empire. Thank you, she said quietly. Robert smiled. I mean it. My mother used to say that the measure of a society is how it treats its children. You're doing the measuring and the treating. That makes you important. Your mother sounds wise. She is. Terrifying, but wise. He took a sip of his coffee. Would you like to have dinner with me? The question was so direct, so unexpected, that Lenny laughed. You don't even know me. I know you're working on a Saturday morning to help children. I know you have good taste in coffee shops. And I know you didn't flinch when a strange man sat down at your table and started asking personal questions, which means you're either very brave or very used to disappointing men. His eyes twinkled. I'm hoping I'm not disappointing you. Lenny looked at him for a long moment. This wasn't the smooth, calculated charm she had experienced with Ben. This was something else, something simpler, something that felt like sunlight after a long winter. There's the Italian place on Bedford Avenue, she said. Giovanni's. They don't take reservations, but if you get there before 7, the wait isn't too bad. Robert's smile widened. Tonight? Tonight. Giovanni's was exactly what a Brooklyn Italian restaurant should be. Small, loud, crowded, and perfect. The walls were covered in black and white photos of someone's grandparents, and the candles on the tables had been lit and relit so many times that the holders were mountains of colored wax. Robert arrived at 6:45. He was wearing the same jeans and a different sweater, green this time, bringing out the flecks of gray in his blue eyes. He carried a small bouquet of tulips. Tulips, Lenny said, surprised. Most men brought roses. Roses were safe, expected, the default flower of men who didn't pay attention. You mentioned your father loved jazz, Robert said. There's a tulip variety called jazz, orange and red. These aren't those, I couldn't find them, but I thought you might appreciate the connection. Lenny took the flowers. Her hands, she noticed, were trembling slightly. Not from fear, from something else. Something that felt dangerously like hope. They talked through appetizers and pasta and 2 bottles of wine that Robert insisted on ordering, each one better than the last. He asked about her foundation, her childhood in San Francisco, her graduate work in education policy, her dreams for what the Children's Lighthouse could become. He did not ask about her marriage. He did not ask about Ben. He did not seem to know or care that she had spent 3 years as the wife of one of the most talked about men in tech. What about you? Lenny finally asked, somewhere between the tiramisu and the digestives. You know everything about me. I know you like Steinbeck, you're from Denmark, and your mother is terrifying. That's hardly a fair trade. Robert was quiet for a moment. He traced the rim of his glass with one finger. My family is, complicated, he said carefully. We have a certain position, responsibilities, expectations. I came to America to get away from all of that, at least for a while. What kind of responsibilities? Robert looked at her. His eyes were serious now, searching. The kind that make it hard to know if people like you for you or for what you represent. Lenny understood immediately. You're rich. Yes. And you didn't want me to know because you weren't sure if I'd treat you differently. Yes, Lenny laughed. The sound surprised both of them. Robert, I just spent 3 years married to a man who had more money than God and less warmth than a Minnesota January. I promise you, wealth is not something I'm looking for in a partner. In fact, it might be the opposite. Robert blinked. Then he laughed too, the sound bright and relieved. You were married? Divorced 6 months ago. Papers signed, done, finished. She took a sip of her digestif. He left me for his PR consultant. Gave me $100,000 in the impression that he was doing me a favor. I'm sorry. Don't be. It was the best thing that ever happened to me. I just didn't know it at the time. Robert reached across the table and took her hand. His fingers were warm, his grip gentle. Then I owe your terrible ex-husband a debt of gratitude. If he had been even slightly less awful, you might not have been in that coffee shop this morning, and I would have missed meeting the most interesting woman in New York City. Lenny looked at their intertwined hands. She thought about all the times Ben had touched her, possessively, performatively, never with this kind of simple warmth. Can I ask you something? She said. Anything. What kind of responsibilities make someone move to another country to escape them? Robert was quiet for a long moment. My father is Frederick, Crown Prince of Denmark, he said finally. My grandmother is the Queen. I'm fourth in line to the throne. When I'm home, I'm His Royal Highness, Prince Robert Christian Frederick of Denmark. When I'm here, I'm just Robert, a man who likes good books and better coffee and who, as of tonight, is completely taken with a woman named after a jazz club. Lenny stared at him. The restaurant noise faded. The other diners disappeared. There was only this table, these candles, this man who had just told her he was a prince with the same casual tone he might use to describe his favorite color. You're a prince, she said slowly. Yes, an actual prince. I'm afraid so. And you just go to coffee shops and read Steinbeck and take strange women to Italian restaurants in Brooklyn? I try to when I can. The security team hates it, but I've gotten good at losing them. He smiled, but his eyes were serious. Lenny, I understand if this changes things. It changes things for most people. But I wanted you to know the truth before we went any further. You deserve to make an informed choice about whether you want to know me. Lenny looked at him. She thought about Ben, who had hidden his affair for 14 months, who had hidden his contempt for even longer, who had never given her the courtesy of honesty until the moment he was discarding her. And here was a man, a prince, who could have kept lying, who could have maintained the fiction of being a simple Danish tourist for weeks, months, as long as he wanted. But he had told her the truth on the first date because he thought she deserved to know. I have questions, she said. I would be worried if you didn't. A lot of questions. I have a lot of answers. Lenny squeezed his hand. Then I think we're going to need another bottle of wine. Robert laughed, signaling the waiter. And somewhere in the universe, the wheels of something ancient and inevitable began to turn. The next 6 months were unlike anything Lenny had experienced in her life. Robert was, she discovered, exactly who he had appeared to be in that coffee shop. Curious, gentle, devastatingly intelligent. He read poetry for pleasure and understood economics well enough to debate policy with experts. He could navigate a formal dinner with the easy grace of a man born to crystal and protocol, and he could sit on the floor of Lenny's tiny Brooklyn apartment eating takeout Thai food with chopsticks like he had never heard of silver service. He came to her foundation events, not as a prince, but as Robert, Lenny's friend. He helped build bookshelves in a Bronx community center. He read to children at a literacy program, his Danish accent making the kids giggle as he struggled with tongue twisters. He met Lenny's father, Thomas Chen, a retired jazz musician who lived in a cluttered apartment in Harlem, filled with vinyl records and photographs. They talked for 4 hours about Miles Davis. When Robert left, Thomas called Lenny and said, "That one has an old soul. Keep him." And slowly, carefully, Lenny let herself believe that this was real. It was real when Robert showed up at her apartment at 2 a.m. after flying back from Copenhagen, just because he wanted to see her face. It was real when he held her while she cried about her mother's death, a wound she had never shared with Ben, had never been allowed to share with Ben. It was real when he introduced her to his security team, 3 terrifyingly competent Danish men named Lars, Henrik, and Anders. And she discovered that they had been quietly watching over her for months without her knowledge, making sure she was safe. Safe from what? She had asked. Robert's jaw had tightened. From anyone who might want to hurt someone I love. Love. He had said love. And 3 months later, in a candlelit restaurant in Copenhagen, with the spires of the old city visible through frost-covered windows, Robert had knelt on the ancient stone floor with a ring that had belonged to his grandmother and asked Lenny Chen to be his wife. She said yes. While Lenny's life was quietly transforming into something from a fairy tale, Ben Hartwell's was loudly transforming into something from a different kind of story entirely. The first year with Kate had been everything he wanted. She was the perfect accessory, beautiful, ambitious, visible. She knew how to work a room, how to charm investors, how to make Ben look like the kind of man other men envied. But accessories, Ben was learning, have a way of becoming expensive. Kate's wardrobe budget exceeded what Lenny had spent in 3 years combined. She wanted a new car every 6 months, membership to clubs Ben had never heard of, vacations to places that weren't on any map he recognized. And she wanted the penthouse. She wanted to gut it, redesign it, erase every trace of Lenny's presence, and replace it with something that screamed, "Kate Morrison lives here." "It's already perfect," Ben said one evening, watching Kate scroll through designer portfolios with a growing sense of unease. "It's dated, and it smells like her." Kate didn't look up. "I want to bring in Kelly Wersler. She did the proper hotel. It would cost maybe $8 million, but it would be worth it for the press coverage alone. $8 million to redecorate an apartment, to transform an apartment." Kate finally looked at him. "Ben, you promised me a life. This was supposed to be different from what you had with her. Better. You said I deserved better." He had said that. He remembered saying it. He just hadn't realized at the time that better came with an 8-figure price tag. The business was starting to feel the strain too. The Hartwell Tech Series C round had closed at $400 million, a stunning success by any measure. But the company was burning through cash faster than expected. And the Asian market expansion, the one that Lenny's father's connections had made possible, had stalled completely after the divorce. Thomas Chen, it turned out, had not appreciated the way his daughter had been discarded. "We can find other partners," Ben's COO, a nervous man named Franklin Price, had assured him. "It'll just take time." But time was something Ben was running out of. The board was asking questions, investors were getting nervous, and Kate was getting impatient. "I want to set a date," she announced one morning, 4 months before the restaurant confrontation that would destroy everything. "For the wedding." Ben nearly choked on his coffee. "What wedding?" "Our wedding, Ben. The one you've been promising me for 2 years." Kate's voice was hard, her beauty sharpened into something weapon-like. "I'm not Lenny. I won't sit around waiting for you to decide I'm worthy of a ring. It's complicated. It's always complicated. That's your excuse for everything." She slammed her portfolio shut. "I gave up everything for you. My career, my independence, my 20s. You owe me a wedding." "Kate, don't Kate me." She stood up, grabbing her bag. "I have lunch with Miranda Voss from Page 6. I was going to tell her we're not ready for public announcements yet, but maybe I should tell her something different. Maybe I should tell her about the hotel suite, about the affair, about exactly how the great Ben Hartwell got his divorce." Ben felt cold. "You wouldn't. Try me." Kate was already at the door. "You have until the end of the month to put a ring on my finger, or I'll put your reputation in the ground." She left. Ben sat alone in the penthouse that Kate wanted to redesign, surrounded by art he had bought to impress people he didn't like, and wondered how everything had gone so wrong. He didn't think about Lenny. He never thought about Lenny. She was gone, vanished into whatever mediocre life women like her lived after men like him were done with them. Probably working at some nonprofit, dating some accountant, grateful for the $100,000 that let her pretend she had gotten something out of the marriage. Ben poured himself a whiskey. He had more important things to worry about. La Maison Rouge was the kind of restaurant where the menu didn't have prices because the clientele didn't need to ask. It occupied the top floor of a building in Midtown, with views of the city that made everything below look like a toy set. Ben had chosen it for his engagement announcement dinner. 3 weeks after Kate's ultimatum, he had produced a ring, 5 carats, Harry Winston, the kind of ring that would look perfect in the Page 6 photos Kate was already planning. The guest list was small but strategic. His lawyer, his PR team, 2 board members with their wives, and Miranda Voss herself, ready to break the story to the world. "To us," Kate said, lifting her champagne glass. The ring caught the light, throwing rainbows across the white tablecloth. "To the future, Mrs. Benjamin Hartwell." Ben smiled and clinked his glass against hers. The sound was like a small bell, announcing something inevitable. They were halfway through the appetizers when the restaurant went quiet. Not the gradual quieting of conversations running their natural course, but the sudden collective intake of breath that indicated the arrival of something or someone extraordinary. Ben looked toward the entrance. A group was being led to the private dining room at the back of the restaurant. 4 men in dark suits moving with the alert precision of professional security. Behind them, 2 figures. The man was tall, wearing a perfectly tailored navy suit. He moved with a casual confidence that Ben recognized instantly. The confidence of someone who had never been denied anything in his life. Old money, maybe European. But it was the woman on the man's arm who made Ben's stomach drop. She was wearing a simple blue linen dress, elegant but understated. Her hair was longer than he remembered, falling past her shoulders in dark waves. She had lost the nervous tension that he had always found so irritating, replaced by a serene poise that made her look like a different person entirely. Lenny, his ex-wife, in the most exclusive restaurant in Manhattan, on the arm of a man who looked like he had just stepped off the cover of a magazine. Ben? Kate's voice seemed to come from very far away. Ben, what's wrong? Nothing. Ben forced his eyes away. I thought I saw someone. Who? No one important. Kate followed his gaze. Her eyes narrowed as she registered Lenny, processed the expensive simplicity of her dress, cataloged the protective way the tall man was guiding her through the room. Is that her? Kate's voice dropped to a hiss. Is that your ex-wife? It doesn't matter. It matters to me. Kate's fingers tightened on her champagne flute. What is she doing here? She can't afford this place. You said she was nothing. You said she was a nobody. She was. She is. But even as Ben said it, something cold was spreading through his chest. Because nobody got into La Maison Rouge without the kind of connections that Lenny couldn't possibly have. And nobody walked with four-man security details unless they were someone worth protecting. Kate was already standing up. I want to talk to her. Kate, don't what? Don't remind her that I won? Kate's smile was sharp enough to cut glass. She needs to know that she lost, Ben. She needs to see what you chose instead of her. It's the humane thing to do, really. Closure. Before Ben could stop her, Kate was walking toward the private dining room. Lenny saw her coming. She was seated across from Robert, their hands intertwined on the table, discussing the final arrangements for their wedding. In 6 weeks, they would be married in a small ceremony at Fredensborg Palace, followed by a larger celebration in Copenhagen. The Queen had approved. The press office was preparing the announcement. Everything was perfect. And then Kate Morrison was standing at their table, champagne in one hand, an expression of triumphant malice on her face. Lenny, Kate said, pronouncing the name like it was something unpleasant she had stepped in. What a surprise. I didn't know they let waitresses into this place. Robert's security team materialized from nowhere, 3 dark-suited figures forming a protective semicircle. But Robert held up a hand, stilling them. I'm sorry, Robert said, his voice cool and perfectly polite. Do we know you? Kate ignored him, her eyes fixed on Lenny. I just wanted to say hello. No hard feelings, right? I mean, you were yesterday's news even before I came along. Ben was going to leave you eventually. I just accelerated the timeline. Lenny said nothing. She simply looked at Kate with an expression of mild curiosity, like she was examining an unusual insect. That's a pretty dress, Kate continued, her tone dripping with false sweetness. Did you make it yourself? Oh, wait, I forgot. You probably can't afford a sewing machine on your little nonprofit salary. Kate. Ben had followed her, arriving at the table with a mixture of embarrassment and something else. Fear, maybe, though he couldn't have said of what. That's enough. Let's go back to our table. In a minute, baby. Kate didn't look at him. I'm just catching up with your ex-wife, making sure she knows how good we're doing. We're engaged, by the way. She thrust her hand forward, the Harry Winston diamond catching the candlelight. 5 carats. Isn't it gorgeous? Ben has such good taste. Well, in jewelry anyway. My congratulations, Lenny said quietly. Oh, that's it? That's all you have to say? Kate laughed. God, you really are pathetic. No wonder he got bored of you. You have absolutely no fire, do you? No fight. You just sit there and take it. I think, Robert said, his voice carrying an edge of steel now, that you should return to your table. And I think you should mind your own business. Kate finally looked at him, her eyes raking over his suit, his face dismissing him in an instant. Who are you, anyway? Her new meal ticket? Good luck with that. She's boring in bed and worse at parties. Kate. Ben grabbed her arm. We're leaving. Now. No, we're not. Kate wrenched free. I'm not finished. She turned back to Lenny, something ugly twisting her beautiful features. You know what? I want you to admit it. I want you to say that I'm better than you. That I deserve everything you had. That Ben made the right choice. Lenny was quiet for a long moment. Then she spoke, her voice soft but clear. I think you should leave, Kate, before you embarrass yourself further. Something snapped in Kate's eyes. Her hand came up fast. The hand with the champagne glass, now empty. The hand with the Harry Winston ring. She swung at Lenny's face with all the force of years of insecurity and months of anxiety and the sudden, terrible knowledge that she had not, in fact, won anything at all. The slap echoed through the restaurant. Lenny's head turned with the force of it. A red mark bloomed across her cheek. The entire restaurant had gone silent. Kate! Ben's voice was sharp with shock. But he didn't move toward Lenny. He didn't check if she was okay. He just stood there, frozen, his hands at his sides. Robert moved. In one fluid motion, he was on his feet, his body between Lenny and Kate, his security team suddenly very visible and very close. His eyes, when they met Kate's, were no longer the warm blue of a man enjoying a quiet dinner. They were the cold, ancient eyes of a prince whose family had defended their throne for centuries. Lars, Robert said quietly. One of the security men stepped forward. You will escort this woman and her companion out of the restaurant, Robert continued, his voice carrying the unmistakable authority of royalty. You will ensure they understand that any further approach will be met with the full legal consequences available to us. Do you know who I am? Ben finally found his voice. I'm Ben Hartwell. I own half the servers your precious European internet runs on. Robert turned to look at him. The gaze lasted only a moment. But in that moment, Ben saw something that made his blood run cold. He saw complete and utter indifference. The kind of indifference that only comes from true power looking at something small. I know exactly who you are, Mr. Hartwell, Robert said. You're the man who let his mistress assault my fiancé, and you're about to become the man who deeply regrets it. The word fiancé landed like a bomb in the silent restaurant. Ben's eyes dropped to Lenny's hand. There on her ring finger sat a sapphire surrounded by diamonds. Even from where he stood, he could tell it was old. Priceless. The kind of ring that didn't exist in jewelry stores because it had been in the same family for generations. Fiancé, Ben repeated slowly. Prince Robert Christian Frederick of Denmark, Lars said, his voice carrying through the silent restaurant. Request that you leave, now. Prince. The word detonated in Ben's mind. He looked at Lenny, really looked at her for the first time since she had walked out of the penthouse 18 months ago. At the quiet confidence in her posture, at the sapphire on her finger, at the four-man security detail, at the man standing protectively beside her, his bearing suddenly unmistakably royal. She was going to be a princess. His mousy, boring ex-wife was going to be a goddamn princess. Lenny, he started. I believe you were asked to leave, Mr. Hartwell. Robert's voice was final. My security team will ensure you find the exit. Lars and Henrik moved forward, not quite touching Ben and Kate, but making it very clear that physical contact was only one wrong move away. Kate's face had gone white. The triumphant malice of minutes ago had curdled into something close to terror. She had slapped a woman who was about to become European royalty, in front of witnesses, in front of photographers, in front of everyone. Ben, she whispered, we need to go. For once in his life, Ben agreed with her. They were escorted out through the kitchen, past the shocked faces of the staff, past the delivery entrance where no paparazzi would be waiting. As the door closed behind them, Ben heard something that would haunt him for the rest of his life. He heard Lenny laugh, not a cruel laugh, not a triumphant laugh. Just a soft, genuine sound of amusement, quickly muffled. She had already forgotten he was there. The story broke at 7 a.m. the next morning. Not from Miranda Voss. She had been at the restaurant, had seen everything, but Robert's security team had made it clear that any premature publication would be met with legal action that would make her career a memory. The story came from the Danish royal house itself. HRH Prince Robert announces engagement to American philanthropist Lenny Chen. The announcement was accompanied by a formal photograph. Robert and Lenny standing in what was clearly a palace, her hand on his chest, the sapphire ring visible, both of them smiling with the easy joy of people who had found each other against all odds. By 8 a.m., the story had gone global. By 9 a.m., reporters had connected the dots. Lenny Chen, the future princess, was the former wife of Ben Hartwell, the same Ben Hartwell whose new fiancé had been caught on 17 different phones, slapping the future princess across the face in a midtown restaurant the night before. By 10 a.m., those videos were everywhere. Billionaire's mistress assaults future princess. Tech mogul's new fiancé caught slapping royalty. You're boring in bed. Kate Morrison's vicious attack on Danish prince's bride. Ben watched his reputation burn in real time. The board called an emergency meeting. 3 investors pulled their funding. The Asian market expansion, already struggling, collapsed entirely when Thomas Chen's former partners publicly announced they would never do business with a man who treated women the way Ben Hartwell treated women. Kate was worse off. Her PR career, such as it was, evaporated overnight. No one wanted to be associated with the woman who had assaulted a princess. The modeling agencies that had been sniffing around dropped her. The influencer brands backed away. Even the society circles she had fought so hard to enter closed their doors. She moved out of the penthouse 3 days later, taking nothing but her clothes and the ring, which Ben's lawyers demanded back, citing the termination of their engagement. "You did this!" Kate screamed at him through the phone. "You told me she was nobody. You told me she was pathetic. You let me make a fool of myself." "I didn't know," Ben said dully. "You didn't bother to know. That's the problem with you, Ben. You never see anyone but yourself." She hung up. Ben sat alone in the penthouse that Kate had wanted to redesign. The penthouse that Lenny had decorated. The penthouse that suddenly felt like a mausoleum. His phone buzzed, another interview request, another demand for comment, another nail in the coffin of everything he had built. He didn't answer. He just stared at the photograph that every news outlet was now running. Lenny and Robert, glowing with happiness, looking at each other like the rest of the world had ceased to exist. She had never looked at him like that. In 3 years of marriage, Lenny had never once looked at him the way she was looking at the prince in that photograph. And for the first time in his life, Ben Hartwell wondered if maybe, just maybe, the problem had been him all along. The wedding of Prince Robert and Lenny Chen was the event of the decade. Held at Fredensborg Palace, attended by royalty from 7 nations, broadcast to an estimated 2 billion viewers worldwide, it was a fairy tale made real. Lenny wore a gown designed by a legendary Danish couturier, with a veil that had been in Robert's family for 4 generations. She walked down the aisle on her father's arm, Thomas Chen looking like he might burst from pride. They were married in the palace chapel, exchanging vows in both English and Danish. When Robert kissed his bride, the crowd cheered, and somewhere in Brooklyn, the staff of a small literacy foundation gathered around a television and cried tears of joy. Princess Lenny, as she was now known, threw herself into her new life with the same quiet determination she had brought to everything. She expanded the Children's Lighthouse Foundation into a global initiative, with branches in Europe, Asia, and Africa. She became patron of 12 charities. She learned Danish, then Swedish, then Norwegian. She gave birth to twin boys, Frederick and Thomas, named for Robert's father and her own. She was happy. Not the performative happiness of her first marriage, the smiling through gritted teeth, the pretending everything was fine. This was real, deep, the kind of happiness that comes from being seen and loved for exactly who you are. She didn't think about Ben Hartwell. She had no reason to. While Lenny's star rose, Ben's fell. The scandal of the restaurant confrontation was only the beginning. In the months that followed, reporters started digging into Hartwell Tech's finances. They found irregularities, exaggerated growth projections, questionable loans, a culture of fear and secrecy that had allowed problems to fester until they became catastrophic. The SEC investigation began 6 months after the slapping video went viral. The indictment came a year after that. Securities fraud, wire fraud, conspiracy to defraud investors. The charges painted a picture of a company built on smoke and mirrors, led by a man who believed his own hype so completely that he had stopped distinguishing between reality and aspiration. Ben's lawyers negotiated. They bargained. They delayed. But in the end, there was too much evidence, too many witnesses, too many people who had been waiting for the chance to watch Benjamin Hartwell burn. He pleaded guilty to 3 counts of securities fraud. The judge sentenced him to 4 years in federal prison, plus 5 years of supervised release, and a ban from serving as an officer or director of any public company. The day before he reported to the Federal Correctional Institution in Otisville, Ben sat in the penthouse, the same penthouse, though it now belonged to the bank that had foreclosed on it, and watched the news coverage of Princess Lenny's speech at the United Nations. She was advocating for global literacy initiatives, speaking with a quiet passion that held the General Assembly spellbound. She looked beautiful, powerful, completely transformed from the woman he had dismissed as boring and unworthy. Ben turned off the television. He couldn't watch anymore. Otisville was known as the crown jewel of the federal prison system. It had tennis courts and a library and a population of white-collar criminals who had fallen from greater heights than most people ever climbed. Ben hated every second of it. Not the physical conditions. Those were tolerable. What he hated was the invisibility. In prison, no one cared that he had been on the cover of Forbes. No one cared about his Series C funding or his disruption of the tech industry. He was just another inmate, another number, another man in khaki waiting for his time to pass. He had visitors at first. His lawyer, his mother, a few friends who hadn't completely abandoned him. But the visits grew less frequent as months turned into years. People moved on. People forgot. By the time Ben was released, 2 years early for good behavior, the world had moved on without him. He was 33 years old. He had no money, no company, no reputation, and no prospects. The tech industry that had once celebrated him now treated him like a cautionary tale. His name was used in business school case studies as an example of what not to do. He moved into a small apartment in Queens. He got a job as a consultant for a startup incubator, helping young entrepreneurs avoid the mistakes he had made. It was honest work, humble work, the kind of work he would have sneered at a decade earlier. And every time he turned on the television, there was Lenny, Princess Lenny, opening a children's hospital in Stockholm, meeting with world leaders at the climate summit, dancing with her husband at a state dinner, looking at Robert with the same love she had shown in that first engagement photograph. She had become everything he had refused to let her be, and he had become nothing. 5 years after his release, Ben received an invitation that made his hands tremble. The Global Literacy Foundation, Lenny's organization, was hosting its annual gala in New York City. As a former tech executive who now worked with education startups, Ben had somehow made it onto the mailing list. He almost threw the invitation away, but something stopped him. Some masochistic impulse, some need to see with his own eyes what his life could have been. He bought a ticket, he rented a tuxedo, he went alone. The gala was held at the Metropolitan Museum of Art in the Temple of Dender. 2,000 guests in black tie, surrounded by ancient Egyptian artifacts, raising millions of dollars for children who would never know that their literacy programs existed because a woman had once been married to the wrong man. Ben stayed at the edges, nursing a glass of water. He didn't drink anymore, hadn't since prison, and watching the crowd. And then he saw her. Lenny was standing near the reflecting pool surrounded by admirers. She was wearing a deep green gown that made her look like a queen from a fairy tale. Her hair was swept up, revealing the sapphire earrings that matched her engagement ring. She was laughing at something someone had said, her face radiant with joy. Robert stood beside her, one hand on the small of her back, looking at his wife with an expression of pure adoration. Ben watched them. He watched as diplomats approached and were charmed. He watched as children from the foundation were brought forward to meet the princess who had made their education possible. He watched as Lenny knelt down to their level, speaking to each one as if they were the most important person in the room. She had always been like that, he realized. She had always had this warmth, this genuine interest in other people. He had just been too blind to see it. She's something, isn't she? Ben turned. A waiter was standing beside him, holding a tray of champagne glasses. Yes, Ben said quietly. She is. I read about her, before she was a princess. She used to run this little foundation out of an office in Brooklyn. My kid went to one of her programs. The waiter smiled. Changed his life. He's in college now. First one in our family. Ben felt something twist in his chest. That's wonderful. She's the real deal. Not like most of these fancy people. The waiter nodded toward the crowd. Can I get you anything? No, thank you. The waiter moved on. Ben stood alone watching his ex-wife work the room with the grace and skill of someone who had been born to it, which she hadn't been. She had earned it. She had built it. She had become the person she was meant to be, not despite being married to him, but because leaving him had set her free. He should go. He should leave before anyone recognized him, before anyone realized that the disgraced tech billionaire had crashed the princess's party. He should... Ben? The voice came from behind him. He turned. Lenny was standing there. Up close, she was even more beautiful than she appeared from a distance. There were fine lines at the corners of her eyes now, marks of laughter and sunshine, and a life well lived. The nervous tension he remembered was completely gone, replaced by a serene confidence that made her seem almost luminous. Lenny, he said. Her name felt strange on his tongue. I mean, Your Highness, I'm sorry, I shouldn't... Lenny is fine. She studied him, her expression unreadable. I heard you were working with education startups now. Marcus Chen, no relation, mentioned your name at a foundation meeting. I am. It's good work. Meaningful. I'm glad. They stood in silence for a moment. Around them, the gala continued. 2,000 people completely unaware of the history standing in their midst. I should apologize, Ben said finally, for everything. For the way I treated you. For the things I said. For... Don't! Lenny's voice was soft but firm. We don't need to do that. But Ben... She looked at him with something that might have been compassion, might have been pity, might have been nothing more than mild curiosity. That was another life, another world. I've moved on. I hope you have too. Have you? Moved on, I mean. Completely. Lenny was quiet for a long moment. Then she smiled, a small, private smile that held no malice and no triumph. Do you want to know the truth? She said. I don't think about it. I don't think about you or Kate or the penthouse or any of it. Not because I'm suppressing it. Not because I'm pretending it didn't happen, but because it genuinely doesn't matter to me anymore. It's like asking if I've moved on from a job I had in college. It's just over, done, part of someone else's story. The words landed like stones in Ben's chest. I'm happy, Ben, Lenny continued. Genuinely, deeply, completely happy. I have a husband who loves me, children who fill my heart, work that matters. I have everything I ever wanted, and none of it has anything to do with you. She wasn't being cruel. That was the worst part. She was just being honest. I'm glad, Ben said, and found that he meant it. You deserve it. Thank you. Lenny glanced over her shoulder, where Robert was watching them with a protective attention that made Ben's presence feel suddenly intrusive. I should get back. Of course. She started to turn away. Then she paused. Ben? Yes? For what it's worth, I think you might become someone good. Someone who actually sees other people, instead of just seeing what they can do for you. She met his eyes one last time. But you have to want it. No one can make you become a better person. You have to choose it every day, even when it's hard. She walked away. Ben watched her go, watched her return to Robert's side, watched him pull her close, watched them disappear into the crowd of admirers and dignitaries. He stayed at the gala for another hour, not talking to anyone, just watching. Watching Lenny work the room, watching the children from her foundation perform a song they had written about the power of reading. Watching the donations roll in, millions of dollars that would change thousands of lives. When he finally left, walking alone through the cool night air of Central Park, Ben felt something he hadn't felt in years. He felt hope. Not hope that Lenny would come back to him, that ship had sailed and sunk and been buried at sea, but hope that maybe, if he worked hard enough, if he kept his head down and did the right thing, he might become someone worthy of the lesson she had taught him. The universe keeps receipts, her grandmother used to say. Ben had paid his bill in full. Now it was time to start earning a new account. The Hartwell Foundation for Educational Equity was small, but it was his. Ben had built it slowly, carefully, using the lessons he had learned from his failures. No flashy press releases. No exaggerated projections. Just steady, honest work, helping underprivileged schools and underserved communities get the resources they needed. He was 48 now. His hair had gone gray at the temples. He lived in a modest apartment in Brooklyn, not far, he sometimes thought with a strange sort of irony, from the coffee shop where Lenny had met her prince. He never married again. He dated occasionally, but nothing serious. He had learned, slowly and painfully, that he needed to become someone worth loving before he could ask someone else to love him. The Foundation's annual report sat on his desk, a modest document that would never make headlines but represented real change in real children's lives. He was proud of it, quietly, privately proud. His phone buzzed, a news alert. Princess Lenny announces expansion of global literacy initiative to 50 new countries. Ben looked at the photograph accompanying the article. Lenny at a press conference flanked by world leaders, looking every inch the queen she had become. Robert beside her, their twins, now teenagers, visible in the background. She had done it. She had become everything she was meant to be, and in his own small way, so had he. Ben closed the article. He didn't need to read the details. He already knew that Lenny's organization was the gold standard, the template that every other literacy foundation, including his own, tried to follow. He turned back to his work. There was a grant proposal to finish, a school board meeting to prepare for, a tutoring program to evaluate. Small things, unglamorous things. The kind of things that had once made him sneer with contempt. Now they were his life's work. The phone rang. Mr. Hartwell, this is Rebecca from the Brooklyn Community Center. We wanted to thank you for the donation. The new library is going to change everything for our kids. It's my pleasure, Ben said, and meant it. Really. He hung up and looked out the window at the city he had once thought he owned. The city that had humbled him, broken him, and, eventually, remade him into someone better. He wasn't a billionaire anymore. He wasn't famous. He wasn't powerful. He was just a man trying to make amends for a lifetime of selfishness, one small act of kindness at a time. And that, he had finally learned, was enough. And so ends the story of Ben Hartwell, the billionaire who let his mistress slap his ex-wife, unaware that she was about to become a princess. It's a story about karma, yes, about the universe keeping receipts, about the way our choices ripple outward, creating consequences we never could have imagined. But it's also a story about transformation, about the possibility of change, about the long, hard road from arrogance to humility. Ben Hartwell spent the first half of his life treating people like assets to be acquired and discarded. He learned too late that the woman he dismissed as boring was actually extraordinary. He watched her become everything he had refused to let her be, and he was forced to reckon with the smallness of his own vision. But here's the thing about rock bottom. It's also a foundation. The lowest point can become the starting point for something new. Lenny's grandmother was right. The universe does keep receipts, but it also offers second chances to those brave enough to take them. So what do you think? Did Ben deserve his transformation? Was Lenny right to move on so completely? And what would you have done if your ex-wife turned out to be marrying a prince? Let me know in the comments below. If this story moved you, please hit that like button. It helps more people find these tales of karma and consequence. And don't forget to subscribe and ring that notification bell so you never miss a new story. We post dramatic tales of betrayal, redemption, and the unexpected twists that life throws at us every week. Thanks for watching, and remember, be careful who you dismiss on your way up, because you might need their grace on your way down. Until next time.